In Italy, for the first time in 2 months, people are outdoors and 4 million workers have returned to construction sites and factories. All right, let's go to Italy now, where Sonia Logre joins me live from Rome. Sonia, Italy has had the longest nationwide lockdown in the world. What lockdown measures are we seeing being eased today?
Well, one of the most important one is the possibility that Italians have been given to go and see their families as long as it is in the same region. You can go and visit your father, your mother, your sister, even your cousin. So that's a big ease for Italians. Another important one is the possibility that Italians were given to go and get their coffees, their cappuccino at the bar. Even though the bars are not reopened for staying, you can take your coffee takeaway. That's very important for Italians. You know how much they love coffee. So that was good news for many Italians that were in the streets this morning in Rome.
How are people reacting to the easing of restrictions? It looks like it's a beautiful day there in Rome. People have been on lockdown for 2 months now. How are people feeling about all of this?
Well, obviously, they're feeling much better because they are as well allowed to go and practice sports in the parks. The parks and the villas have reopened in Rome, for instance, but as well in other cities. So you are allowed to go for sports. You're even allowed to go in some beaches in Italy where you can go for a run, where you can do yoga. So the mood is better, though it hasn't completely changed. I mean, you don't see masses of people in the streets, but as you said, more than 4 million people have been allowed to go back to work. That means more people in the streets, in the public transports that have changed a lot. They have literally changed their way of having people seated in the buses. You can't sit next to another one. Same thing for the tube in Milan, for example. They are basically counting as well the number of people that can or cannot go into the tube. So better mood. But the thing has the complete mood is not totally back to optimism, full optimism at least. They're waiting for another 2 weeks to make sure that the curve of infection is not rising up again. And maybe in 2 weeks, I think Italians will start to really feel relieved if the curve obviously stays as low as it is now.
Sonia, I know during this lockdown over the last 2 months, grandparents were not able to see grandchildren in many cases, grandparents, of course, being at that higher risk group. Are we seeing a lot of family reunions taking place today?
Absolutely. We are seeing them, but the basic is still there. You need to keep social distancing as well with your loved ones. That's not easy for small kids and for grandparents, but it is basically mandatory in order to avoid contagion. So even though you are allowed to go and see your grandparents, if you're a kid, you need to keep the distance and you need to wear a mask. But definitely so many kids who have been away from their grandparents those last 2 months have gone to their grandparents' houses today.
All right. It is nice to see some easing of the restrictions there for sure. Sonia Logre in Rome. Sonia, thank you. Well, let's get more on easing lockdown measures in Spain. Ashish Sharma joins me now from Madrid. Ashish, tell us about some of the measures that we're seeing being eased there in Spain today.
Well, actually, I'm out on the street and I'm standing in front of a hairdresser's, which has just opened up for the first time in 7 weeks. And they've been telling me that they've been inundated with phone calls of people, clients who really want to make appointments, but they're very, very strictly adhering to the government measures. So they can only have no more than one person in the hairdressers each time and only one person attending to them. Further down the street, a bar is opened up as well, a bar restaurant for the first time, but they're serving drinks through the window that faces out onto the street, and they're wearing masks and gloves as well. So slowly and slowly, we're seeing measures of de-escalation coming into small businesses, which is a very vital and important source for maintaining the economy and keeping it up running. But everyone here, anyway, in terms of the shops and the bars that have opened up, are strongly adhering to the measures and responsibility that the government has issued out in terms of safety and security.
I'm sure people are thrilled to finally be able to get their haircut again after several weeks of doing their home lockdown haircuts. So how are people feeling today? How are they taking this newfound freedom? I saw some people walking behind you. They're still wearing masks. Are people, taking a measured response to this?
Well, actually, my wife has told me that while I'm here to make an appointment to get my hair cut, she thinks it's a bit of a mess. I've talked to some people wandering around the streets, and they feel a lot more relaxed, to be honest. Being able to get out and walk and exercise, even though they may have restricted times by which they can do that. So, for example, senior citizens will go between 10 and 12 in the morning, and then again between 7 and 8 in the evening. But they feel that sense of release. I have to say, though, at a government level, at a political level, the opposition parties aren't happy with this slow de-escalation process by Pedro Sanchez, and he may well struggle on Wednesday when he goes back to Congress to request another 15-day extension of this state of emergency, because they feel that the country really now is in recuperation mode and everything needs to be done to reactivate the economy, and they don't feel that another 15-day delay will help that. So that's going to be an interesting debate that we'll see in Congress. But for now, people do feel better. The atmosphere feels better. Just the fact that there is noise and movement, I think it just generates the fact that we are now really coming out of this stasis that we've been in for so long.
Ashish, I've just been told that you yourself had coronavirus, and it's nice to see that you've recovered and seem to be doing quite well. Is there any talk there in Spain about issuing people who've had coronavirus with immunity passports or anything like that so that they can start traveling?
No, to be honest, there hasn't been a discussion at the certainly at governmental level. Pedro Sanchez, when he spoke on Saturday, spoke briefly about the tests that they're doing in terms of being able to see and trace people to get a general idea of how many people in the population have been infected. So they're looking at something like 30,000 families, and they're going to be tracing them over a period of 14 days, doing 3 tests. And that will be seen as the sort of norm, if you like, to speak about the general population. But there hasn't been a discussion specifically about whether the antibodies are something that they are looking at to see whether people can get immunization passports. I think there's a lot of debate about whether they have the right tests for that. And at the moment, the government here is a very, very cautious one. And so they don't really want to jump and preempt anything which may not in the end prove to be the right path to take. So at this moment, they're just keen on doing as many tests as they can to keep an eye on how the population reacts, but more so, they want to see with this de-escalation how many reinfections they might get. I think that is the first priority. So they will keep it to that step-by-step level.
Ashish, I know there in Spain, football is really huge, and I know there's some good news on that front about getting teams back out practicing and hopefully playing soon.
Yes, that's right. One of the processes that starts from today is that professional sports people can actually start training individually and get back into their forms and fitnesses. Whether all the clubs will actually be able to have them opening their facilities and training together, well, that's still some way away from that. But certainly in terms of professionals who really need to start getting back into fitness, they can now go out into open spaces. They have no limitations in terms of how much time they can be out and about in, so they can train for as long as they want, and they can also train with a coach. They don't not have to be in isolation training by themselves. And this will be a very welcome measure, not just for the footballers, but for also other professional sports people here in Spain. And of course, for the population, this is a country which is sports mad in general. It'll be a welcome sight to feel and know that very soon we might get back to seeing professional sports, be it on the TV screens, maybe not directly in stadia at the moment, because I don't think they'll allow the congregation of populations together for quite some time yet.
Yeah, certainly, but it is a bit of a return to normalcy. Ashish Sharma in Madrid, thank you so much. Well, in the U.S., President Donald Trump has urged states to continue easing lockdown restrictions and says some governors aren't going fast enough. Locals flock to beaches and parks in the dozen states that have eased restrictions. The president insisted it's possible to both lift lockdowns and protect people from the virus. State economies have tanked after shopping centers, salons, and other businesses were ordered shut in order to contain the outbreak. Yasmin Al-Sabawi joins me now from Bethesda in Maryland. And Yasmin, President Trump has made a plea for reopening the country, even saying his administration has already saved more than 1 million lives. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, that's right. I want to go through a couple of quick figures. You mentioned the economy, but President Trump gave this Fox News virtual town hall on Sunday evening amidst more than 30 million people in this country filing for jobless claims, the economy having shrunk by nearly 5%. So some really dire circumstances for this president, but he kept up a very optimistic, positive message, saying first that he does still expect that a vaccine will be available by year's end. That's certainly the fastest we would have ever seen a vaccine be ready. We weren't sure if he meant that it would be available in the number of doses that we need it to be. That means 300 million, of course, to meet the demands in this country. But also the president saying that he thinks that along with the vaccine, states can not only begin to reopen, but that people will be safe, and that he expects that next year, 2021, the U.S. will have its strongest economy ever. Now, despite keeping up some of this positive rhetoric, of course, ahead of the election in November, the president did also revise some of the figures that he'd earlier touted about the death toll. Now, he earlier said that he expected that at most, because of the White House's social distancing guidelines and other measures, that perhaps the death toll would be about 60 to 65,000 in this country. He's now revised that to about 90,000 people. So some pretty grim numbers, considering the United States makes up only about 6% of the world's population.
Yasmin, the Senate is returning to work today after 5 weeks off. Now, this is despite the growing number of cases in Washington, which is emerging as a new hotspot. Is this part of the government's overall reopening strategy?
Very much so, and I should stress the Senate, of course, is dominated by Republicans, and the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell insisted that the Senate come back to Washington. The House, which is led by the nation's top Democrat, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, is not coming back, and they're actually citing the advice of the physician on Capitol Hill. Among the Senate, half of them, nearly half, are over the age of 65. And of course, when they come back to Washington, they bring back all their staffers. So it will be interesting today to see how that really plays out on the Hill. The third branch of government, the Supreme Court, they're hearing oral arguments today, but they're doing that by telephone, and that's certainly never happened before. So the government is back to work, and much like what's happening in Congress, this is mostly a partisan issue. I can't say it is entirely here in Maryland. The Republican governor, Larry Hogan, has been quite cautious in terms of reopening, but you will see that red states or Republican states in this country are gearing more toward reopening. Well, a lot of them are generally more rural states in the Midwest. Many of them are conservative and generally do not heed federal government advice or feel that there is too much, perhaps, government interference in daily affairs, and that's why they're geared more toward reopening. The president on Sunday night singling out Democratic governors in Washington State, in Virginia, in Michigan, saying that by extending their stay-at-home orders, they're doing a lot of damage to the economy, and those governors still resisting. Places like California in particular, that's really one of the first to begin recovering, still keeping people sheltered in place out of an abundance of caution.
Yasmin Al-Sabawy in Washington. Yasmin, thank you. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has claimed there is significant evidence COVID-19 originated in a lab in Wuhan. Pompeo's statement on Sunday contradicts the conclusion of the U.S. intelligence community, which has said there is no evidence the lab was responsible for the spread of the virus. Pompeo also suggests the virus was man-made. The news comes as there are reports President Trump ignored warnings in January from top U.S. spy agencies saying COVID-19 could become a global pandemic. All right, let's go now to Scott Lucas. He is a professor of international politics at the University of Birmingham and joins me now. And thank you for joining us on the program, Professor. This assertion by Pompeo echoes Trump that the virus came from a lab in Wuhan, but it goes against their own, the U.S.'s intelligence community, which says that the virus was not man-made or genetically modified. Why do they continue to insist that this was manufactured in a lab, despite all the evidence otherwise?
Because we're dealing with reality versus politics. The reality, as you mentioned, is that the U.S. intelligence agencies have said this is not man-made, this is not genetically modified. They have not ruled out that there might have been an accidental release from the lab of the virus, but they have not said there's any evidence to this point that this has happened. But Mike Pompeo is not acting on behalf of the U.S. intelligence agencies. Mike Pompeo is acting on behalf of President Trump, who is seeking re-election. And in particular, Trump and Pompeo are trying to cover up the fact that the disastrous mismanagement of the crisis in the United States, as you have just heard, has led to a death toll of almost 68,000 people, and it will probably go far beyond the 90,000 that Trump talked about yesterday. So what do? You can't say we messed up. You can't say we've caused this disaster, because then Trump won't be reelected. So what you do is you blame someone else. They have blamed the World Health Organization. They have blamed Democrats. They have blamed Europe. And of course, number one is you try to whip up the fear of China. This is not to say that the Chinese are not responsible, for example, for trying to cover up the scale of the outbreak at the start. International intelligence agencies have said that the Chinese tried to limit knowledge of what was happening, in part because they didn't quite know actually how far this might go. But that is far different from saying that the Chinese basically unleashed biological warfare, which is dangerously close to what Pompeo and Trump are saying, contrary to any intelligence estimate, including from the U.S. intelligence agencies.
We also know that Trump was warned about the virus and the potential for a pandemic in January. Trump is saying he was told on January 23rd, but that actually he was told that it wasn't likely to be a big deal. But there are reports he was warned as early as January 3rd, a difference of several weeks. Why is this so important?
Well, first of all, let's be very clear. Donald Trump is lying. Your correspondent gave an example of other wild statements that Trump had made. For example, that the vaccine will be ready by the end of 2020, that the economy will be roaring again. Those are sort of exaggerations because Trump doesn't really have much knowledge of what's happening. But this is a deliberate lie. The Chinese informed the U.S. intelligence agencies on January 3rd. They immediately told Donald Trump, as they are supposed to do. On more than 12 occasions, he disregarded intelligence in his daily briefs about what was happening. He, in fact, told his health secretary that the health secretary was being alarmist. Donald Trump said that the virus would be close to zero in the number of deaths in February. So why does he say now, oh, I didn't know about this until January 23rd? He's covering his backside. Donald Trump has been close to criminally negligent in terms of what's happening. But Donald Trump has survived so far. Think about other crises, Russia, Ukraine, by trying to say, look over there, or fake news, or